Hey everybody, Nicky Bandini here with Serie Chronicles. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to remind you all that we've got a free 7-day trial for our Chronicles Tifosi Patreon membership available right now. So you can get access to all of our full episodes 100% ad-free, plus bonuses such as videos and behind-the-scenes content. You can subscribe to the Serie Chronicles YouTube channel. We recently crossed the magic threshold of 1,000 subscribers. So thank you all for supporting us on that. But please do continue to hit that like and subscribe button. It does help us out a lot. And do give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to help us be found. And without further ado, let me bring into the show Mina Rizuki. Mina, I haven't seen you for like 2 weeks, which
Really?
for us is like really rare, isn't it?
It's really rare. It's been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And I just started noticing that I don't think my teeth are straight at the bottom. Not a time to start thinking about it. But I swear they were straight like a week ago.
Is this new? Mina's been off having a mid-season sunshine break, which I'm not at all envious of.
The one thing I can say to you was that they had London weather for that week. So, I mean, there was so much overcast and like rain. And I'm like, then my mom was taking pictures of London and there were lots of sunshine. And I was like, what just happened? Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the curse, you know?
Let's bring it with you. Well, you weren't the only one, Mina, taking some time off to go abroad because the Italian national team went off to the United States of America for 2 friendlies against Venezuela and Ecuador. It was a bit of an odd one. I mean, I think the March international break is always a bit weird, isn't it? Because everyone's focused on the season running, everyone's got their other focus. But obviously, in a tournament year with the Euros coming up, you need to try and have some competitive games. And I want to say to everyone who's looking at these teams, Venezuela and Ecuador, and going, were these competitive enough? They are both ahead of Brazil in World Cup qualifying right now. Just putting that out there, by the way. It's, not saying they're perfect teams, but they're not. Perhaps neither are Brazil, who were coming and playing some of the other top.
Who didn't have a coach, who wanted a Carlo Ancelotti and just got one now. So I don't know if this is like the bar that we should be like looking for.
That's true. Maybe Brazil's just a bad bar. But 2 games and 2 wins against Venezuela and Ecuador. 2-1 against Venezuela. 2-0 against Ecuador. I don't know if we need to do like a detailed blow-by-blow analysis of these games. I always say to everyone, like, I am the first person to say, don't take friendlies too seriously, no matter who they're against. I think international friendlies are a little bit more serious than club friendlies, but still, I think what we're looking at is what are the things we maybe learned about what Luciano Spalletti is thinking and about the team he's got in mind.
Mm-hmm. Aren't you just happy that we had a week off rather than... I was really worried about this week because I always think of this week as in my only time to travel. And then I thought, what if it's about like us figuring out if Italy's going to go to the Euros? And I'm just so glad that we weren't in one of those situations, you know?
Do you know, I was watching the playoff final, the end of it between Wales and Poland. I didn't watch the whole thing, I'll admit, and from the sounds of what I was told, people who did watch the whole thing, I think I dodged a bullet by not watching the full 120 minutes. But I was watching the end and the shootout, and I was just going out to the Wales fans. Obviously, would have gone out to the Poland fans if they'd been the ones knocked out. But just that experience of not knowing if your whole summer's going to be different for a penalty shootout was just horribly familiar. I suppose it wasn't always penalty shootouts for Italy that we found ways to not qualify by, but that feeling of being knocked out in a game from the party that everyone else is going to in the summer, like the thing that, everyone else is going to get to go and do it. It really feels like, I don't know, it feels like being back at school and not getting invited to the party to me.
Yeah. And when Spalletti was saying, we have to go to USA, I'm like, don't even think about it. Like, that's just, I'm not going through this again. Okay, I'm not going through another. There is no way we're missing out on another World Cup. It just can't happen. It
can't. So I think that's it. Well, we don't overread into these friendlies, but I think some encouraging things that we can take from them. Mina, I thought one of the interesting things that Spalletti talked about, because they played a back 3 both games in this little tour, and Spalletti, because a lot of people actually, when Spalletti took the job, were saying, oh, he's going to make Italy play like Napoli, and this is the only way he's going to want to play. And I think he's showing his flexibility, but I think he's also showing what I always think is a fundamentally important pillar of being a national team manager, which is recognizing you can't do that much in the small amount of time you have as a national team manager. And so he said quite openly, the best team in the country is Inter. Inter play with a back three, so I'm trying to take some of that and do it with my national team.
Yeah, also it's a three-man backline is often used in Serie A. So it's a kind of shape or a type of thing that everyone plays in Serie A and everyone's comfortable playing with. I mean, Juventus have it, Inter have it. Like a lot of teams understand how to play in a back three, and I think that he thought it was the right way to go. Also, I also love the fact that he used this opportunity to actually test things. There was a lot being said about Southgate in England in the sense that he didn't really test out a lot of Southgate didn't try out different players for different roles to see who he was going to take with him. For example, playing Stones twice when you needed to see what other centre backs that you would have in England. This isn't a show about England, but I'm saying as in that was important that we got to test out people like, what about Buongiorno? How is this going to cope if we play, Bonaventura, or is it Locatelli is better with Jorginho next to him? And I like the fact that we tested out Cambiaso. Who can we take out on this? Having these experiments give us a lot more understanding, and playing often with a three-man back line and also knowing that we also have the 4-3-3 under our belt is something that I think will really help us going forward. This is one of the things that I love about good coaches, like Inzaghi, like about Allegri, obviously not anymore about Allegri, but one of the great things is that they never changed too much, but just introduced new ideas to make the team tactically flexible. And that's going to be important going forward when we do face teams. How good we are playing these different formations remains to be seen, because Ecuador and Venezuela aren't exactly the kind of teams that we're going to be facing. So I am a bit scared, because even in these games, that everyone's talking about Italy suffering quite a bit. And so are we good enough to be facing the better teams in Europe? And that is Germany, who seem to be a lot better than I remember them being over the last 2 years, and obviously Spain and stuff.
Well, I thought the performance against Ecuador seemed much more. Italy had much more control in that game, and I think that speaks slightly to the starting 11. You look at the centre of midfield in that game against Ecuador, you're starting Jorginho and Barella, whereas against Venezuela, you're starting Bonaventura and Locatelli. I don't want to dismiss those players, but I do think there is a clear sort of starting line, I think, in that Ecuador game that has a lot more control. Barella was brilliant against Ecuador. But I do think what you just touched on, Mina, about the three is important as well in terms of offering different options. Because yes, you could reasonably look at Italy's back line and you could say that the starting back three should be Bastoni, Acerbi and Darmian, because all of those three players play together for their club team. They're all Italian. Acerbi, we need to have a talk about. We'll get on to him in a second. But just on talent, you could make that case. That's who it should be. But you also can make a case that we have some really talented players who we could swap into that defence, who also play in a back three. Scalvini, we saw in the game against Venezuela, Mancini in the game against Ecuador, Di Lorenzo, who's played sometimes in the back three for Napoli, even though it's not his natural home. There are other options that we saw tried out in these games, and I think that's exactly, as you say, what we want to see in these games.
Yeah, do you not think also against Venezuela we sort of saw a more Juventus-dominated team with Chiesa, Cambiaso and Locatelli, and maybe that's why they were so poor. Whereas when you looked at the one against Ecuador, it was the Inter sort of domination of Darmian, Bastoni, Di Marco, Barella, and I still include Bellanova in there. I mean, he's no longer Inter, but he is like that player, right? And you just feel like it's very different when you do have Inter players dominating. And listen, you should always go with whatever team right now is doing the best in Serie A and trying to take as much of that chemistry with you to the national team.
I think that's just, it's not just Italy, it's just any national team. Like it's hard. You haven't got much time. You've got a small amount of time to work with. Bring the players who get each other and bounce off each other and do well. But there were other players slotting into it as well who I thought came away with lots of credit. Pellegrini obviously had a good game against Ecuador. He's in really good form ever since he had De Rossi with him. The first game against Venezuela, both goals scored by Matteo Retegui, who has had a really I don't know. He's had an interesting first season at Genoa. He hasn't exactly set the world on fire. I think he scored 6 goals, but I do think we've talked about this loads of players before. You have to make some allowances for player coming from a different continent, a completely different playing context, and adjusting to a new league. His record for Italy since the start of 2023, he scored 4 goals. Which is more than anyone else for the Italian national team. He scored a goal every 87 minutes he's been on the pitch for Italy. I greatly enjoyed that there's already a Twitter account which is counting down how close he is to being Italy's greatest all-time goal scorer. So it's already gone. On the one night it went, Matteo Retegui is 33 goals away from being Italy's greatest goal scorer. Matteo Retegui is 32 goals away from now he's 31 games away from being Italy's goals away. So people are having fun with it, and I think we should not place excessive expectations on him. I think for me, the jury is still out on him as a player. I haven't seen enough to make a firm judgment. I think my impression of him is still very much that sort of player who you're not going to get a lot of game involvement from him. I don't see him doing like lots of different things, even though I will say that Spalletti spoke afterwards and said he thought he had helped the team hold the higher line. Spalletti specifically praised him for that, saying he thought he helped the team come out and hold the higher line on the pitch. But he has been, at least for Italy, ruthlessly effective inside the penalty box. And do you know, it's too soon to know if that will sustain. We'll get to the Euros and we'll have a whole different judgment on him. But all I will say is, wouldn't it be nice after all the years of Immobile, who I've made the case for him lots of times and what a player he is at club level? I know Patrick, if he listens, will want to attack me for being critical of him, because I have a lot more time for Immobile than I think some people do. But he has been frustrating on the national team. So if we had the opposite, if we had a striker who doesn't do a lot except for putting the ball in the net, it would be lovely.
Yeah, I think it also has a lot to do with the way that you play football, right? Like, as in, if you are a team that requires your number 9 to also be a number 10 as well, or to help create, or for example, Lautaro Martinez is doing right now for Inter, then by all means, like that's the kind of play that I love to watch. Karim Benzema is my holy grail. But right now, Italy create a lot. That's not what they need. They don't necessarily need another midfielder to help. They just need a guy who can just convert the opportunities that they do create. And I do think that when it comes to our midfield, there came a while where I don't remember Italy having a bunch of great midfielders. And I say a while, but I'm not sure when, to be honest. I think around 2010, or I'm trying to think. I don't remember us noting like a great, or even...
It felt like there was that passing the baton area, wasn't there, where it was... the likes defenders of De Rossi were very much at the end of their career, and you had Verratti kind of on his own as the guy who was supposed to be the transition player, and wasn't really doing it. And you had maybe like the likes of Tonali, who have become better since but weren't ready for it yet. There was a gap.
There was, I mean, even if you look at like sort of Dino Baggio and stuff, they were good midfielders, but never like... I feel like right now that's probably our area of strength. Like, we have good midfielders. The problem is that we don't have the strong defense that we used to. I don't think we have a bad defense, but it's certainly not as good as what we've previously seen throughout Italy's career. Like, as in, defense has always been the area that we really shine in. And now I have question marks over which defenders I would take, and I'm still not sure about any of them, And I think forwards, we've always had a great number 10. We've always had these great players who are either great in, trequartistas, or sort of, like the great Robbie Baggio. But otherwise, we don't have strikers and we don't have that. But I'm sort of happy with our attacking midfielders. I agree with you. I'm really excited about Pellegrini. I do feel sorry for him that he didn't end up going to the Euros last time around. He's one of my favorite players. I've always felt like he was too heavily criticized, and I'm so glad that he's starting to shine under De Rossi, despite all the abuse that he seems to get from his own stadium. But I'm glad that he's getting to do what he can do when placed in the right role. I still have question marks over Chiesa. I don't know what I feel about him, to be very honest with you. But I think in midfield we're fine. If Locatelli could just be a little bit better on the ball, but so that we don't need...
Does Locatelli start for you? Is it Locatelli? Because at the moment it's a 3-4-2-1, and of course that still can change. But that's the 3-4-2-1 was what we saw in these two games, which really only gives you two real central midfielders, and one of them's Barella. So who do you put with Barella? I think it's Jorginho still. I know producer Simon is absolutely furiously against this case. Maybe my Arsenal bias is coming into this one.
For Spalletti, it depends, right? Because Mancini likes more dynamic play. He's a lot more... I think with Spalletti, he just... For the game to be better, you need better on the ball players, and Locatelli is just not that at the moment. So I would much rather have Jorginho, because Barella can offer so much. Like, he's just an all-star, perfect midfielder, and having someone alongside him who can just dictate and not have to be concerned with all the other things makes it better. Locatelli's just not good enough at the moment. Maybe he will be that, but he's just not right now. So I would always have those two in midfield right now. From what I've seen so far, it would be those two for sure.
And then you have the two in front of them, which I think is also a really interesting conversation because, again, you can look at the Ecuador game, it was Pellegrini and Zaniolo. And you can look at the Venezuela game and you can go, it's Chiesa and Fratesi. Fratesi's had a weird season because he's barely started at Inter at all because they have a very competitive midfield. But I like him. I think he's a good player and he's certainly, again, scored goals for Italy. So it feels like that's a really competitive set of options. You look at the wing-back positions and you've got Di Marco, I think for sure is going to start on the left if he's fit, especially listening to Spalletti talk about that, wanting to keep that Inter block. But you have Udogie as another really like decent alternative on that side. I think the right is a little bit less convincing perhaps. It was Raul Bellanova got the nod against Ecuador. Against Venezuela, it was Cambiaso. But you could ask Di Lorenzo to play there. He obviously plays it right back in a back four more for Napoli. You could ask Darmian to play there, certainly. I think Darmian's probably the safer option, but you might want him in the back three. It does feel like there's quite a lot of options at a lot of spots on this team, which is a nice feeling. And even in goal, we were having a discussion right before we started recording about who we want in goal. Mina, you want someone who's not necessarily been getting a lot of love in that spot.
No, I know everyone talks about like Vicario has had, I mean, I wrote a piece about him about how he's such a brilliant goalkeeper and has been not just a source of brilliance in terms of technique at Spurs, but leadership as well. He's been fabulous for Spurs this season. I mean, he's become like a godlike status. Like the camera's always on him when Tottenham score a goal just because they like to see his celebrations. That's how important he's become for Spurs. But I think Provedel is the best goalkeeper in Serie A. I'm obsessed with Provedel. So I would love for him to have had more chances. And he's not even being mentioned in the three because everyone would want a player like Carnesecchi because he's obviously young and could grow into something really big and give him the opportunities now so that he could grow into that. But I feel really sorry for Provedel because for me, I would love to have him in my team. I would love to see him all the time, but I would always have Donnarumma as my starter. And I think that his ability, like he was tremendous, like as in he was brilliant in the first match.
He saved a penalty against Venezuela, which was again
precisely.
They weren't great Italy against Venezuela, but they had a couple of big saves from Donnarumma.
Sorry, what about Nicolo Zaniolo? Just out of curiosity, what do you think? Because he's such a weird player. He's been terrible for Villa, right? And then he's been so good.
He started really well at Villa. There was a lot of enthusiasm for him when he first got there. It feels that it's definitely faded. Because I remember at the time when the betting judgments were being handed down, there was uncertainty about what his future was going to look like. There was a lot of anxiety about that because people felt like he started well and they didn't want to lose him. But it does feel like things have gone off the boil. But he did score in their last game, I think, against West Ham. So
he doesn't score enough. Like he misses these great chances. Like to me, he's a bit like Rafael Leao, right? He creates a lot, great on the ball, and then misses these chances that you want him to score, right? So it's a little bit like all bug, no bite.
Yeah.
But he does allow the team to progress quite nicely, and he's such a vertical point.
Yeah, I think with Zaniolo, it's to some extent, I'm not saying he's the same as Chiesa because they're not, like, they're quite different in other ways, but I do think they're both sometimes guilty of being head down players. They don't look up enough, and I think that's something that I dislike about them. But at the same time, would I like having those options in my squad? Yeah, I do actually. I think having that running and that ability to break lines is really interesting in both of them. So look, I don't think there's any of us are kidding ourselves that this is one of the favourite teams in the Euros, but I do think I feel more positive about this team than I have in a little while. I think I feel like those options we just talked about at different positions are stronger than they have been for a while. I don't know if there's any other spots on the team you particularly wanted to talk about before we move on.
I wanted to ask you who you would choose as your defenders.
Well, this will lead into the next conversation because I do think we need to talk about Acerbi because there's been more movement on that story since I did my voice note last week. If we're going on football talent and putting all other considerations aside, Acerbi would be in my starting 11. Bastoni would be in my starting 11. And I think, honestly, I think I might just lean entirely on the Blocco Inter and have Darmian there just because let that knowledge and the comfortable, because I think with defence in particular, like you're asking people who know each other's movements, asking people to know each other, where each other are, and that comfort with each other can be really helpful. But if you're asking me on talent, I think Scalvini absolutely deserves his opportunities. I think he's really having a good season. So
he's great for Italy though. But I would also have Scalvini. But would you have Calafiori, Buongiorno, Mancini? Who are you dropping?
I like all these players getting options, but if you're saying to me this is the most important game and you want your safest 11, that's when I turn back to Blocco Inter. I just feel more comfortable with them because I think they know each other.
Okay, so you would start those three. You start Darmian, Acerbi, and Bastoni, and I'm gonna honestly say I agree with you. Yeah. But then who are your backups for those three?
I mean, I think they're the names you've just been mentioning, really, aren't they? I do think Scalvini is probably the backup on the left. I think Mancini can take that spot in the middle. I think Mancini might be the one I think different depends on the spot in the three, doesn't it? It depends on whether you're asking for the one who's going to hold the central spot or if you're asking for the ones who are going to hold the outside spots. They each have slightly different attributes they bring to it, but I think those are the two that I feel are most ready to step into that group. I think Buongiorno is certainly going to have his spot in this team in the years to come, but I'm not sure if I trust him quite as much yet.
Yeah, would you rather him or Calafiori?
Not sure. What do you think? I'll let you answer this one. You answer your question.
I would go for Calafiori personally. I think I agree with you. Buongiorno is the long term, they're both long term plans. But would you go with Di Lorenzo? Obviously, right? You would definitely have him on your team.
I trust Di Lorenzo a lot as a defender. I think he's got that Champions League experience from the last bit as well with Napoli, which really matters. I think that run of winning the league title, it just teaches you things, like being in those competitive sides and having to win things, I think teaches you different things. So I think the question is just how exactly he fits, because he's plays much more in a back four, and it's going to be an adjustment for him either way. And do I want him more as a right wing back or as the right centre back in a back three? I think that's exactly where Spalletti needs to practice those things and work them out, and he'll have a better insight. But I do like Di Lorenzo as a footballer a lot.
Yeah, I think it's also what's brilliant about Spalletti is that he talked about, the players that he's going to pick are those that can play different roles or can assimilate to different sort of game plans. And that's what's so good about Darmian, right? He can be your wing back, he can be a central defender. Then you've got Cambiasso, who can be a winger, who can be a wing back. There's a lot there that can be malleable in terms of what positions that they would go for. That's another thing. Would you take Bellanova or Cambiasso if you were going to start? Bellanova had a great game, but Cambiasso has also been pretty great for Juventus this season.
He's had a pretty good time at Juve. He has. He's been. He's not setting the world alight, but you don't need every single player on your team to be a set a world alight kind of player. And I think that he's shown himself to be
smart.
Yeah, exactly. To be intelligent. So I think I'm more inclined towards Cambiasso, but again, it's always tricky when you take people out of their team context, because so much of what they do is based on what everyone else around them is doing. But I do think that he's fit into a team that for most of the season has been very competitive. Obviously, Juventus's form has tipped off a cliff a bit recently, but I think I like Cambiasso.
And your forward line would be Retegui, and who are the two behind?
Yeah, so we're doing the full team, which is doing in bits.
Yes,
I am taking Retegui right now, and I'm not saying I'm taking Retegui with confidence that he's the best thing since sliced bread. The reality is, if you're looking for the weakest point in that team, it's the attack. There's no question. But I think that he's scored the goals, and until he stops scoring the goals, I'll give him that chance ahead of Raspadori, who hasn't quite, and Immobile, who's had plenty of chances. That's not necessarily excluding those players from my squad. I'm just talking about who starts. I think behind the attack, I wish that Zaccagni's relationship with the national team hadn't been so complicated, but it has been. So he's probably a bit on the outside of that picture right now. I think that Pellegrini's form is really strong, so I want Pellegrini there. And again, there's sometimes players who I think I look at them and go, you know what? Even if you're not doing it for your club team as much as would be ideal, you keep showing up and performing well for the national team. And so for that reason, I think Fratesi. I think he hasn't been bad for Inter. He just has had a hard time getting into the team. So I think I like Frattesi, and who knows? In that case, I might even say, in some odd way, not having started many games this season means he's got fresh legs to take into the Euros for us.
Would you take Bonaventura? No.
I'd need to do my full squad list before I'm going to start thinking about the numbers and whether or not he fits in. He's definitely on the edge. He's not a guaranteed pick for me at all.
He didn't have a good time against Venezuela. So
yeah, because I think that Chiesa, with all my questions about him, is definitely ahead of Bonaventura in that pecking order. I think Zaniolo might be ahead of him, but I think that you are then getting into that question as well of your overall squad makeup and versatility, because I do think with Bonaventura, one thing I would say is he can play in the deeper midfield roles if he has to. You definitely don't want him starting there because you've got better options. But if you're picking someone who you think has some versatility, I would give him that in his credit.
Like in Locatelli's role.
Yeah, but I don't think you. The problem is then again I start thinking who I'd pick ahead of him, and it's a lot. So I think he'd be on the fringes for me. I'd have to do my 23 and go from there.
You see, this is
still
the thing.
23? Maybe it's not even 23.
No, it is.
Serie Chronicles is a Mina Chronicles production.